This episode is made possible by our sponsor, Landmark College, the college for students who learn differently, offering comprehensive supports for students with ADHD and other learning differences, both on campus and online. Learn more at lcdistraction.org.
Hello and welcome to Distraction. I'm your guest host, Renee Brooks. So I'm always interested in learning about new comorbidities that can come with ADHD because those are pieces that can continue to push us towards a greater overall wellness. So when you learn about a sleep disorder or you learn about audio processing disorder, those things can really change the way that we interact with the world and make things go more smoothly for us. And one of the things that has been most helpful in my life personally is learning about a condition called vertical heterophoria that has some ties to ADHD. And I've brought along a guest today, Dr. Debby, to explain to all of us what vertical heterophoria is and what it means and how it affects us. Dr. Debby Feinberg is the co-founder of Neurovisual Medicine and the director of clinical care at Vision Specialists of Michigan. And Dr. Debby has been performing pioneering work with Binocular Vision Dysfunction, or as it's also known, BVD. Dr. Debby and her colleagues have treated more than 15,000 patients with BVD, and she's here today to talk about her work and how vision impacts ADHD. Thank you for joining me, Dr. Debby Feinberg.
Thank you, Renee. I'm so happy to be here to have this opportunity to share my work.
Yes, I love your enthusiasm. Like, you know what? I think the thing that I most like about talking to you and interacting with your work is the genuine joy that I feel when you're talking about what is happening and how things are affecting your patients.
Yes. The one thing I wanted to share, as you were mentioning, that people, might have this condition of two eyes not working together. By the way, I am an optometrist, and my work is helping not just each eye see well, but how do these two eyes work together as a team? That's probably the most important aspect of my work. Normally, an eye exam might take 15 minutes, and we take 80 minutes because we go into at least 15 different tests about binocularity to see, are these two eyes in synchrony and in harmony with each other? So I do think very often my patients call themselves silent sufferers. They know they don't feel good. They just don't know why they don't feel good. And I think what's important is when I was in school, we didn't really learn that we could help dizzy or nauseous or headaches, maybe, because that could be eye strain, but balance difficulties and so on. So I think the beautiful part about doing this work is to really sort people properly and see how much of the layers of symptoms can I peel off during that eye exam.
That's incredible. And you mentioned that the eyes work in harmony. Is that what it means to have a binocular vision dysfunction, that the eyes are out of sync with each other?
That's correct. And usually we think of, the anatomy of either the eyes are not quite right on the vertical plane, on the horizontal plane, or both. Everybody has maybe seen a picture of somebody with a turned in eye or turned out eye, but very often the vertical misalignment is so fractional and so small, we might not even see that misalignment. And many of our patients have what we call micro units of misalignment, so small that in most eye exams, they may not even find that there is a lack of coordination of the images.
And so when you have that lack of coordination, what type of symptoms would someone experience that would lead them to go, something is off?
They very often feel like frustrated learners. They feel like they reread for comprehension. One of the most common things is they'll put their finger out to keep their place on the line because one eye's on one line and one eye's on the other, and they're struggling to maintain a single line of reading. So they'll skip a line, reread for comprehension. Many of my patients are motion sick, which is so interesting. They've usually been car sick since young children, or they acquired it over the years. Another interesting thing is my patients often come into me after having had a head injury. Now, sometimes they're aware of the injury, and other times they sort of forget that they fell off their bike when they were little and that they never liked to read after that. So we always take them back to that head injury history. And once it gets revealed, it's pretty fascinating how things sort of emanated from that early beginning. And that's where things like post-concussive symptoms come in, like nausea, dizziness, headaches, imbalance with walking, light sensitivity, sound sensitivity. So there's that, panoply of symptoms that when we were in school, we didn't really learn that we could help this population.
When did you first discover that you could help the population?
It started with a fun story. My brother-in-law and I and my husband and his soon-to-be wife, we were double dating, and he was holding up a loose prism in front of one of his eyes. And I said, Arthur, where'd you get that prism from? He said, medical school. I went to the chief of ophthalmology and I said, I am not reading well and I need your help. And he said, there's nothing wrong with your eyes. He said, yes, there is. And he insisted on being helped and he just handed him a loose prism. He said, use this prism and see if you can help yourself. And I said, well, did that work? And he said, not the best. But he still had it in his hand on that double date. He was sitting there in the back seat, working his eyes. I said, you know what, Arthur, why don't I examine your eyes? Let's see if I can find out what's going on. Did all the tests that I learned in school, how to do, again, vertical and horizontal testing. And though we learned how to do those tests, we didn't always know what to do with the results. And that's where my work took off, is how to analyze the data differently. But sure enough, my brother-in-law called himself Clumsy Klutzy. If you remember the days, those of you who are old enough to remember Mr. Magoo, he had
Ye-
the thick glasses and he used to walk
Yes.
into furniture. And that was my brother-in-law. He didn't have thick glasses, but he certainly felt uncoordinated. So again, that's another issue. When the two eyes don't work together, we don't feel like we know where we are in space. So I credit my brother-in-law every day as being the one that pushed me, because once I figured out that he had this misalignment, once I put the prism in his glasses, he processed it for a number of years, sending people to other eye doctors because I'm his sister-in-law, can't send everybody to me.
Yeah.
So he called me up almost 10 years later and he said, I need to send you my dizzy patients. I said, why? What would I do with
Right.
them? He said, you're going to help them. I said, how? He said, just the way you help me. So in the beginning, I said, just send me two people. I'm not sure what you're talking about, but I'm happy to check them out. And he was spot on. Some had sick bags. They were so nauseous. Some had canes that weren't for a
Wow.
broken leg, but they felt so unsteady. And I didn't mention this, but he is an ear, nose, and throat doctor. So he
Yes.
did know dizzy people. He saw them every day. And those were the ones who didn't have an inner ear issue, but he listened to them carefully and he began to say, you know what, they sound a lot like me. And so
Wow.
together with my husband, who's an ER doc, who is his brother, the three of us would get together on a weekend and say, I complained that I was writing books on everyone. I said, I don't have a time to write all this down and I have to have a sorting tool. So we developed this questionnaire, which has now come to be known as the BVD, Binocular Vision Dysfunction Questionnaire. I would add a couple questions. Arthur would add a couple questions. My husband might hear me talking all the time. He says, you have to add these. And so as we created this questionnaire, it began to be what I call the gold standard for how to identify this population, because they come sometimes enter into it from headaches, sometimes enter it from dizziness, sometimes from anxiety because they feel scared that they might fall down or afraid that they might have a panic attack on the highway. When they're going fast on that road, the flicker frequency of images in their peripheral vision really throw them off. So it began to be a very interesting, special interest of mine, and it's now all that I do. And ultimately, my goal was to train others. So we have developed an institute for training. It's now about 7 years old, and we have 31 colleagues trained across the U.S. and one in Australia.
Yes. Oh, I'm so excited. There's somebody in Australia. People have been asking and asking me, and I didn't know what to tell them yet. Um, I first came across Dr. Debbie's work because Dr. Debbie trained my doctor, and she also trained a doctor in the state of New York who one day did a podcast with an old friend about the connection between ADHD and this eye condition called vertical heterophoria. And as I listened, I started to feel like there was somebody spying on me in my living room because I had the dizziness and a perpetual headache, and I've been motion sick all my life. But the thing that really made me sit up straight was that I had neck pain that was so intense that I was on 2 different kinds of muscle relaxers, 2 different kinds of painkillers, and a compound cream to apply directly to my neck because the neck pain I experienced was so severe, it was the only way to keep me comfortable enough to work, and even then, I would still have a day or 2 a week that I couldn't go to work. And so I quick went and did the questionnaire that Dr. Debbie just told you how she developed, and I found that there was a doctor right in Pennsylvania because I'll tell you, I was willing to drive to New York. That's how much pain I was in, but I was delighted to find, that Dr. Kathy Collins was right here in Pennsylvania, and I only had to go to her. So, really, directly, not indirectly, Dr. Debbie's work has completely changed my life. I do not take medicine anymore. I have a pair of eyeglasses with prisms.
Your story's a very common one. Usually, our patients have a list of meds and are often told that they must be making it up because they're told there's nothing wrong with them. So they often feel that they're not believed. And so when they fill out that questionnaire, it's isitmyeyes.com. When they go to that site and see the 25 question questionnaire, they often say, "Oh my gosh, how'd you know my secret?"
Yes.
I mean, I've been telling doctors all these symptoms for years, and oftentimes the patients stop telling about it and they become quiet and they just suck it up. They just say, I can't tell more people because they don't get it. So when they read these questions, they finally feel validated that somebody gets them. One of the most interesting ones for me that I didn't know about in the beginning is my brother in law said, you have to ask them if they're overwhelmed in large department stores. I said,
Yes.
why do I have to ask them that? He said, because they all are. I said, okay. So, what I learned over time is that the bigger the store, the more objects you're going to have, the taller the ceiling, the more stimulation there is. And if these patients aren't synchronized with their eyes working together, they're overwhelmed. Their eyes are picking up on images that they can't process, and they just feel like they often will tell me, I'll go early in the morning, or I'll go late in the night, but don't make me go when everybody's in the store. It's just too much for me. So they, have their escape route and just exit before they can finish their shopping.
Yes. And that's the thing that I think is most fascinating. Well, not fascinating, maybe I think it's important for people without vertical heterophoria to know this can be debilitating for the people who have this condition. And just like Dr. Debbie said, you stop telling people about it because it starts to make you sound like maybe like you're a hypochondriac, or they get tired of hearing about you being in pain, and you get tired of talking about being in pain, and there's no particular solution. I mean, I was at the chiropractors, I was getting MRIs done, and it all gets expensive, and there's no answer at the end of it. And so you feel much like you feel when you discover that you've got ADHD that was undiagnosed. You feel very isolated and othered and not really certain how to proceed.
Yeah, a lot of my patients, we once did a study where we've done multiple studies. We've been in different brain injury catalogs, or not catalogs, but journals, optometry journal, of course, and recently in an ear journal, which is actually where we got our Binocular Vision Dysfunction Questionnaire validated. But
Yes.
one of the studies that we did, there were 8 to 10 doctors that our patients on average had seen. And, you stop going to those doctors because they don't have the answers for you. I do want to say that many of my patients, when you spoke of ADHD, they have been given that diagnosis. But when they get their glasses and they start to process information differently, they feel like maybe that diagnosis really wasn't fully accurate, and they
And
feel
that's
like they can
important.
read again. I think it's so important that they feel that they can process information again in a more efficient way.
That's really cool because we don't want people out here being treated for ADHD that they don't have. Accuracy in diagnosing is critical.
Hey everybody, this is Sarah Gurton, producer of Distraction. I am here with Steven Soltero, a Landmark student. You might remember Steven from a couple of weeks ago when we spoke about his time at Landmark and how he found his way there. Thank you, Mom. So he's back on the show today to just see how the semester's going, how things are going for him. So welcome back to Distraction, Steven.
Hi, thank you for having me back, Sarah. It's great to be back.
Awesome. So is there anything that you would want to tell somebody who is thinking about coming to Landmark, just straight off the bat, of why it's a good place?
Yeah, so one of the things that at least I like about Landmark is a multi-model learning. And what that means essentially is every person kind of has their own preferred way of like learning and retaining information. Some people can read the stuff and do really well. Other people have better time listening to something. Someone like me, I have very difficulty with audio processing. So because of that, having a lot more visual aid, having things like PowerPoints, having things like group activities, is something that not only is every professor encouraged, but very much, for the most part, required to do at Landmark to an extent. And because at the end of the day, learning comes down to the person who is learning, not the person who's teaching. And so that's very much a very part that I like about it, that I've had all good experiences with my professors and, working with the students, not just as individuals, but as a whole, what works best, and then helping every student learn the subject, because college is hard enough as it is.
So how did you figure out how you learned best? How did that come to you?
Trial by fire, I think, is the best way. Before coming to Landmark, I was working a lot of usually service things, so retail and then food. And dealing with management was very much they tell you everything, but then you're like, can I take notes real quick? And they're like, no, we'll do this. And I'm like, I'm not retaining any information. I'm being honest with you. It's in one ear, out the other, and you want me to get all these things done? I'm not going to do that. So by going through classes at Landmark and even before Landmark, but very much at Landmark, finding what works best for me. What are some good ways for me to retain information? Is note-taking something I'm good at? If not, what can I do to get better at it? It's never just what are your strengths, but also what are you not so good at and what can we do to make those better? And so things like note-taking I suck at, I don't like doing, but I still try my best to do it so that I can have something to take to class. And just the process of doing it helps me retain the information more so than actually relying on the notes. And at the end of the day, that's what you're checking for, if a student can know that stuff.
Did you have advisors that helped you stay on track and figure out what worked and didn't, like to kind of guide you through that process?
Some core advice is what I had for the first 2 semesters or first 2 years I was here. And advisors, as far as like the sense of like helping me stay on track, for the most part, I can't really speak about other students, but I haven't had much difficulty in the sense of like finding the stuff to do. It's more actually doing it. I know plenty of my friends, though. Their advisors very much help them find what to do. But we also have resources like what I usually use a lot more than advising would be something like the Charles Drake Center for Academic Support. We call it the DCAS. And that's if I need some sort of writing help, if I need some help with like either developing a rough draft or doing outlines or sitting down just in a place to study. That's what the DCAS is for. You can set up an appointment to have someone help me, which I've done plenty of times. And just having that little one-on-one advice, that help and is this working for you, really does make a huge difference, at least for me.
So, how are you feeling at this point in the semester?
Well, considering we're only doing a 12-3 week, so as soon as Thanksgiving break happens, we're done with this part. All the classes. I feel like I'm doing pretty well. It's been a really good semester for me, and I'm enjoying it. So it's great to be returning back at a Landmark, and now that with the whole pandemic getting not so hectic, it's been really enjoyable.
We're going to keep following along with you and check back in.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here and for joining us and all that good stuff.
Thank you for having me.
And if you want to learn more about Landmark College, just go to lcdistraction.org.
When it comes to treating vertical heterophoria, what is the way that we can treat it, and why isn't it something that's usually found in your regular everyday optometry office?
Well, the first thing is that the assessment involves, as we talked earlier, about binocular vision. When we were in school, we learned about a 21-point eye exam. In other words, there were literally 21 points that we could be doing on the patients. But when we all graduate and we head off to our respective work settings, usually 20 minutes is dedicated to allow the time for you to have that evaluation. First thing I discovered is that if I'm really going to help these patients, I better dissect how are these eyes working together. And some of our traditional tests simply told me they were fine. And so I had to almost create special lenses, special tests that could help me truly assess their binocularity. One of the things that's more interesting than anything is that when you work with that phoropter that we all sit behind during the eye exam, which is better 1 or 2, most of the increments of measurement are whole units. And what I discovered during this work is that many of my patients have eyes off on a vertical or horizontal plane of a fractional unit. It's a unit that's under the radar screen. So once I've done some of this testing behind the phoropter, then I take them away from the phoropter and we work a lot in free space with special prism. A prism, by the way, is a lens that will bend light. So again, if my eyes aren't working together on a vertical or horizontal plane or both, when I use these small units of prism, I can actually put those images together. And people often say they feel like the images got bigger, it got blacker, it got darker, bolder. They're seeing two eyes working together for the very first time. I once had a patient that said, I feel like you gave me one eye. I never had one eye. They always work separately. So
Yes.
I loved that comment because it really told me how discombobulated they must have felt not to have that. I call it synchrony of the two eyes.
It makes you feel a little bit like a little dizzy. Like I can remember driving down the highway and you're trying to look in your rear view mirror to safely pass someone, and when you would quickly snap your head back to center, it feels as though you've been spun around in a circle sometimes. And that's not a real comfortable feeling to have when you need to be completely alert and present on the road. And so,
It's a demanding task, and the faster we go, the better those eyes better work together, or we're going to
yes,
be disoriented, have visual confusion. The highest Google search right now to all of my colleagues' offices is anxiety on highways or fast roads. And they Google it, and up pops the website, and they say, "Oh my gosh, it's my eyes," because oftentimes when we get anxious, it's really the body's way of saying, you are not safe. You better pull over. But they don't often say, it's my eyes. So when they
Never.
Google anxiety on highways, up pops vision. They go, oh my gosh, there's a vision connection. I never thought of that.
That's the part that's really something. Like when I was listening to it, when I was listening to the podcast where I learned about it, I was like, my eyes? What the heck do my eyes have to do? And of course, they were making the tie-in that a lot of people with ADHD find that there's a connection between their eyes and their ADHD. Um, and of course, the anxiety is something that a lot of people with ADHD have too. And I can remember when Dr. Collins dropped that prism in for me to see with it for the first time, and she let me sit with it for a while. And I remember think it felt like everything had settled. There's no other way to describe it. It felt like there was a lot of activity going on and everything suddenly went calm. And I felt like I could take a deep breath for the first time. And it's just
I
like it's indescribable because it was like that in that moment I was like, "Oh, I'm going to be fine. This is all going to work out."
So if we see two images, we're going to close an eye. The problem with the fractional units is you're seeing almost like micro movement. And I love how you said everything's sort of settled because many of my patients feel like they're feeling motion when their body is still. So it's a mismatch. Why are things moving? And when they say to me, things are now still, all I can say is, wow, that means they must have been moving before. How unsettling is that? And then you're in a moving vehicle, so you can imagine how disconnected that must be. A lot of my patients talk about an out of body feeling or a disconnected feeling. So I think those are some interesting things that they'll describe, or they feel like they can organize their home better. That's another interesting thing that they used to look at their home and it was chaos because they couldn't see the forest for the trees anyhow. But when you
Yes.
synchronize the images, everything can go in its place where they want to put it. But before, there was no place because everything sort of blended in together.
I tell people all the time that clutter has a noise for me. And it's that visual noise. It screams at me. And it would make me very snappish. And you're like all of it, like I'm so excited that you came because all of this I'm like, yes, 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 this is me. Even all these years later, I was diagnosed with vertical heterophoria in 2015, and it's still just as exciting to me because it's the solution is so simple compared to every other thing that I was doing.
Yeah, I always like to say in a holistic world, we have a non pharmaceutical answer that can make people feel like they can function at a much higher level. And when you talk about learning, when school, we used to learn that 80% of learning is done through the eyes. Well, if these aren't helping me, I'm in big trouble. So
Yes.
many of my young children who come to us, and even adults for that matter, talk about how they utilize audio tapes because there's no way they're going to read a book. And so I think about how challenging it must be for the child in the classroom. And they're going to get fidgety because they just can't sit still because they don't feel comfortable in that space. I was listening to one of the distraction podcasts before today, and it was a young guy who talked about how he was the first time that he just got so upset at his condition of what was called, in this case, ADHD, was that, or distractibility, is that he actually was asked to read out loud. That is torture for my patients because if you're skipping lines and if you're rereading for comprehension and you can't be sure where your eyes are going to travel on that page, about the last thing you're going to do is read out loud.
Yeah, because you can't see it. You can't keep your place with it. Now, do we know where the connection between vertical heterophoria and ADHD comes from? Like, is there any research into that?
I am so um, anxious to begin that kind of research. And we've tried, there's some very interesting schools in different areas where that's all they do. It's, let's say, a private school that works with children who have learning challenges.
Yes,
And I have inquired, and it's very difficult to get in those systems. But if I could have that opportunity, what I would love to do, it'd be very simple, is just utilize the questionnaire and see how many children score high. It is a simple tool. It takes 10 minutes to fill out, or a parent could help the child. But in the end, I do believe that it needs to be analyzed, studied, dissected so that a simple solution that I think is simple, a pair of glasses that can synchronize images, how great would that be for the child to perceive themselves in a better way? Very often, a patient might say to me, I thought I was stupid. I said, no, you have all the intellect. You just couldn't process visually, but now you can. So I think it's so important that we give people that sense of self and what they're now capable of doing. So, no, I really think it needs to be studied,
for sure.
and it's just the right place to do it.
Because as someone who has both, I can say when you can process visually, that's one less thing that your brain is doing, and there's the overall effect that that has on you. So things become easier, less anxiety, same thing. And this is something that made it easier to do both. And I don't think it's a coincidence that managing my ADHD suddenly became a lot easier because it's still there. It's still kicking my butt. But when you're not in excruciating pain all the time, you tend to have the energy to deal with other things that need to be dealt with.
So, yeah, I think something that might be helpful to the audience is that somebody will say to me, well, who has this? Like, what are the ages? And I say they can be 4 years old and they can be 94 years old and every age in between. We even actually had a colleague in our office who does young children. It was a 10-month-old that wore glasses, very, very early prescription.
Mhm.
But the child had these tight, tight fists that just couldn't be unclenched. And this was
Oh.
almost her way of stabilizing her body. And my colleague held up just a little bit of prism in front of her lenses, and her body became peaceful. So I really think that it's a population that can be misunderstood. It can be the learning child. It can be the frustrated, person at the workplace who's scrolling on their computer and getting dizzy and nauseous from scrolling. It can be somebody falling in the elderly. As we lose our ability to be strong and grounded, there's three things that give us balance: our eyes, our ears, and our ankles, or proprioceptive part of our anatomy. And if, as we age, we can't be strong in our gait, we can certainly tune up the visual system. And we can certainly wear hearing aids to bring more information in that will help us know our location in space. So I really think it's important that people have that opportunity to be evaluated. It is a special eye exam because of the detailed analysis of the binocularity.
I wrote an article maybe I don't know. I want to say I wrote that article in 2017. And it's funny when you mentioned that people tend to not talk about it. As I mentioned earlier, I was diagnosed in 2015. It may have even been 2019 before I wrote that article because I thought nobody wants to hear about my neck pain and how it got solved with glasses. And so I wrote about it one day, just thinking, oh, I'll put it out there because, just like it benefited me from the podcast, maybe it'll make a difference for somebody. And whoa, even to this day, I still get huge responses. People send me pictures of themselves in their new glasses all the time. I'll have to start sending that stuff to you because really, it's your work that's doing it. I just told people about it.
Well, I think you've offered a huge gift. You have really, and it's sort of fun because every once in a while my colleagues will say, do you know about this black girl lost keys? And I said, I do. I do. She's amazing. She's given a gift to, and it's all about education, knowledge, information. People critique Dr. Google, but the truth is, thank goodness for it because it leads us to answers that others may not know about.
Yes. What else do you want everyone to know about vertical heterophoria? You, the work you do, anything?
I would say that the most important thing, if you have listened to this podcast and you're saying, I did have a head injury, or, I hate to read, or, why do I not feel good in those big stores? Any of the things that we've talked about, they should fill out that questionnaire. Is it myeyes.com? And once they fill it out and they start answering the questions, I think it'll resonate with them that some of these things are them. But in the end, we just have to score it. It'll get scored automatically. They will get a phone call and they will know if it might be a piece of their puzzle. And I'm a big believer in peeling off layers. We don't know how many layers there are, but we owe it to ourselves to make sure that we optimize every aspect of what our deficits might be so that we can live a fuller life and not work so hard to function.
That's what it's all about. Again, thank you for your work because it has completely revolutionized my life. It got me off the couch. I was on the couch in pain the day that I heard the podcast, and you got me back off the couch. So thank you.
Thank you, Renee, for sharing it in the world that you've shared it in. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Dr. Debby and I are planning a Facebook Live for November 18th at 11 a.m. EST. So if you're listening now and it's before then, come. We would love to have you and answer questions about that.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your time today. I really, really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for your interest.
Thank you so much to Dr. Debby Feinberg for joining me today. You can learn more about BVD and Dr. Debby at vision-specialist.com and at nvminstitute.org. Please remember to reach out to us with your comments, questions, and show ideas. Record a voice memo or write an email and send it to connect@distractionpodcast.com. Distraction is created by Sounds Great Media. Our producer is Sarah Girton, and I'm Renee Brooks. You can find me at blackgirllostkeys.com. Until next time.
The episode you just heard was made possible by our sponsor, Landmark College, the college for students who learn differently, offering comprehensive supports for students with ADHD and other learning differences, both on campus and online. Learn more at lcdistraction.org.